Victor Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries, sat in his luxurious leather chair, gazing out at the New York City skyline. At first glance, he was the epitome of corporate perfection. Tailored suit, impeccably gray hair, and an expression of power. At 58, he carried the pride of having built one of America's most renowned companies. But beneath that impenetrable exterior lay a bitter memory he had buried long ago. A brief ring on the intercom interrupted his silent contemplation. "Mr. Caldwell, a Mr. Marcus Johnson is here. He doesn't have an appointment but insists it's urgent," said Rebecca, his assistant. Victor frowned. The name didn't sound familiar, but something prevented him from dismissing the visitor. Instinct, perhaps? "Let him in," he said, adjusting his tie and adopting the imposing posture he used in all decisive meetings. The office door opened slowly, and Victor saw a tall, determined young man step inside. Something about his face, his way of walking, sparked an instinctive reaction of shock in Victor. It was too familiar. The young man had Victor's strong jawline and sharp nose, the same face he saw in the mirror every morning. Victor's heart raced as the young man approached, and in a steady, controlled voice, said, "Mr. Caldwell, my name is Marcus Johnson. I believe you knew my mother, Amara Johnson." Victor's world tilted as if it were about to collapse. He clutched the edge of his mahogany desk tightly, his knuckles turning white. An uncomfortable silence filled the air as he tried to absorb the revelation. "Marcus," Victor murmured, almost breathless. "Please sit down." Marcus didn't move. His gaze remained steady and relentless, every word carrying deep-seated resentment. "I'll stand, thank you. I'm not here for games." Victor cleared his throat, trying to regain control. How is your mother?" he asked, almost dreading the answer. A flash of pain crossed Marcus's face, and he replied, controlling himself as best he could. "She passed away 3 months ago. Cancer." The news hit him like a punch. The woman who once meant so much, who had been the most well-kept secret of his life, was now just a memory. He hadn't had the chance to say goodbye. Victor lowered his head, letting out a sincere "I'm sorry." "You wouldn't know, would you?" Marcus shot back, his tone sharp. "You made sure of that 24 years ago, when you fired her and paid her to disappear." The cutting accusation pierced Victor like a knife. He tried to justify himself. "I was young, scared. The company was taking off, and I thought I was doing what was best for everyone." Marcus interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Best for everyone? Or best for you, Mr. Caldwell? While my mother struggled to raise me alone, you lived as a devoted family man." Victor got up from his chair, slowly walking around the desk, guilt and shame etched on his face. "It wasn't that simple. I did what I thought was necessary, Marcus." The young man's expression remained hard, as if he were about to explode, but he controlled himself. He took a deep breath, pulled an envelope from his pocket, and placed it on the desk. "My mother left me this letter, explaining everything. Who you were, what happened. She made me promise I'd only seek you out once she was gone." Victor stared at the envelope as if it weighed a ton. It was Amara's handwriting. For a moment, he almost forgot about Marcus, the office, New York. It was as if he were back in time, vividly recalling the woman he had loved and abandoned. "I'm not here for your money or your name," Marcus said, breaking Victor's trance. "I've done well without them for 24 years. I just needed to see with my own eyes the man who could do what you did." Victor was speechless. The cold and calculating businessman was gone, replaced by a man stripped of his defenses. He knew he could never undo the past, but Marcus's presence represented a chance for redemption, even if he didn't yet know how to earn it. "What do you want from me?" he finally managed to ask in a barely audible whisper. Marcus stared at him for a long moment before replying, his voice filled with determination. "I want you to know that despite what you did, she won. I won." Victor remained still, watching Marcus with a mixture of regret and admiration. He was trying to process the presence of this young man who looked at him as if he could see straight into his soul. It was like seeing a reflection of himself, but a reflection that was stronger and, perhaps, more honorable. The tension in the office was almost tangible, and Victor knew that Marcus's words, "I won," were a clear challenge. As Victor stared at the envelope still lying on his desk, Marcus continued to speak, his voice alternating between frustration and pride. "I graduated with honors from Stanford. I'm an attorney at one of the most prestigious firms in New York, and believe me, I did it all for myself and for my mother. We won, Mr. Caldwell, despite you." Victor felt the weight of Marcus's judgment. He tried to respond, but the intensity of Marcus's words held him almost spellbound. "Marcus," he began, hesitantly, "I know I made mistakes, but you have to understand that—" "Understand what?" Marcus interrupted, with a bitter laugh. "That you're sorry? I'm not here to hear apologies. My mother didn't need them to raise me, and neither do I to move forward." Victor swallowed hard. Marcus's words were like blades. But as painful as they were, he knew the young man was right. Nothing he said now could undo the years of absence, the struggles he himself had imposed on Amara and their son. Still, he felt compelled to speak. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that, even with the time lost, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right," Victor said, and this time, his voice held an unusual sincerity. Marcus narrowed his eyes, evaluating the seriousness in Victor's words. He seemed torn, as if he were struggling between the need to confront the man and the reluctance to involve himself any further with him. "So, what do you expect to accomplish with this?" Marcus challenged, crossing his arms, almost daring his father to say something that could make up for the past. "Do you think that acknowledging me now will simply make up for everything you did? That a word from you will bring my mother back?" "No, Marcus, nothing will bring your mother back," Victor replied, his voice choked with emotion. "But maybe now you can have something more, something that was taken from you. If you'll allow me, I want to be a part of your life." For a moment, Marcus's eyes softened, but he quickly regained control. He seemed divided, as if at war with something bigger within himself. "And what about your perfect family? Do they know about me?" he questioned, with a cynical smile. "How are you going to explain to them that you're a hypocrite who had a child out of wedlock?" Victor lowered his head, feeling a wave of shame overwhelm him. He knew Marcus was right and that his words couldn't be ignored. He was preparing to answer when Marcus looked at his watch and headed for the door without waiting for a response. "I'm not here to be your dirty secret, Victor," Marcus said, his voice carrying restrained pain. "That was my mother's role for 24 years. I'm better than that." Victor sat, watching as Marcus left his office, each step carrying a decision he knew he would have to face. The truth, his omission, was now before him, threatening everything he had built. And now, there was nowhere left to run. Victor Caldwell, the man who always knew exactly what to say and do to maintain control, was now standing on the edge of a personal abyss. And for the first time in decades, he had no idea what his next step would be. Alone, he looked again at the envelope on his desk, the weight of his past decisions pressing on him like an open wound. Victor sat alone in his office, staring at the envelope Marcus had left behind. He knew it contained words he'd tried to forget, truths he'd buried for over 2 decades. With trembling hands, he tore open the envelope and began reading the letter inside. Amara's handwriting was familiar, as if it were a ghostly voice calling out to him from a past he could no longer ignore. Each word seemed to break down the walls he'd spent years building. "Dear Victor, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here, and our son has finally met you. I have spent 24 years imagining this moment, rehearsing what I'd say if I ever saw you again. Yes, our son. He is everything I ever hoped he'd be, and more. And every day, as he grew, I saw fragments of you in him. It was painful and beautiful, all at once. I could never forget what happened between us, but I had to move forward, for him and for my own sanity. Raising him alone was not easy. There were countless days I wanted to reach out to you, to share the burden of responsibility. But I knew the cost would be too high. I would have to give up my dignity, and Marcus would have lost the right to be his own person, free of your shadow. I couldn't let that happen. So, I stayed strong, and he grew into the man he is today, strong, brilliant, and full of integrity. You should be proud of him, Victor. Despite everything, he became someone much greater than I could have imagined. And I'm so proud of him. If there is any humanity left in you, I hope you treat him with the respect and love he has always deserved, even if he never received it from you. I'm not asking you to make amends because I think it's what you want. I'm asking because it's what he deserves. Goodbye, Victor. I hope you find peace with your choices. I know I found peace with mine. Victor finished reading the letter, his face wet with tears he hadn't known he could shed. 4 years, he had lived as though he could control every detail of his life, carefully separating work from personal matters. Now, holding Amara's letter, he realized how much he'd sacrificed in his pursuit of power, how many moments he had missed, and how many lives he had affected with his choices. The intercom buzzed, jolting him back to the present. Rebecca's professional tone came through the speaker. Mr. Caldwell, your CFO, Richard, is here and says it's urgent. Victor cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. Tell him I'll be there in a moment. He put the letter in his desk drawer, as though trying to hide the evidence of his past once more, and left his office. As he entered the boardroom, he saw Richard waiting, his face serious and strained. Victor, we have a problem, Richard began, his tone uncharacteristically tense. There are rumors spreading about an illegitimate child. Some of the shareholders are worried. We need damage control. Victor felt his stomach drop. He knew Marcus's arrival would come with challenges, but he hadn't anticipated this. He'd hoped for time to process, to approach things on his own terms. But the world of business and secrets was unforgiving. It's true, Richard, Victor confessed, his voice barely a whisper. I have a son I never acknowledged. But I'm going to set things right. Richard stared at him in disbelief. Victor, are you serious? We're talking about a massive scandal, one that could shake Caldwell Industries to the core. Shareholders will be asking questions, and the board won't stand for this kind of upheaval. Victor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he was about to lose, but also the need to do what was right. I know, Richard, but I can't hide it any longer. I've decided to bring him into my life, and that means the company will have to deal with it, too. Richard sighed, still clearly upset. All right, then. I'll schedule a meeting with the board for tomorrow. Be ready for a fight, Victor, because this won't be easy. When Richard left, Victor remained behind, contemplating the battle ahead. It felt like every part of his life was crashing down. He'd be forced to confront everything he'd built and everything he'd hidden. He knew he'd face harsh judgment from the board, and, perhaps more painfully, from his family. Later that night, Victor returned home and found Evelyn waiting in the living room. Her face was calm, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Their children were not around, likely sensing something serious was about to unfold. Evelyn gestured for him to sit. Victor, she began, her voice strained, I've sensed something's been off for a while now. I know there's more to all of this than what you've told me. So, just say it. Victor took a deep breath, knowing that this was the hardest truth he would ever have to reveal. Evelyn, I made a mistake, before I even met you. I had a relationship with someone I worked with. Her name was Amara, and it led to a child. Evelyn's face froze as she struggled to absorb his words. You have a child? A child you never told me about? You've been hiding this for all these years. Victor nodded, feeling the overwhelming weight of guilt and shame. Yes, I do. His name is Marcus. He's a remarkable young man. He found me, Evelyn. He came looking for answers. Evelyn's expression changed from shock to hurt, her voice barely a whisper. And now? What are you planning to do about this, about him? Victor swallowed, knowing his answer would either bridge the gap or widen it further. I intend to acknowledge him, Evelyn. He deserves that. He deserves to know he has a father, even if I failed him for so long. She shook her head in disbelief, laughter mixed with bitterness. And what about us? What about our children, Victor? What about the family you built based on lies? Victor felt her pain as keenly as his own, realizing fully the consequences of his long-buried secret. I know this will be difficult for all of us. But I'm willing to face whatever comes, Evelyn, because it's the right thing to do. And I'm asking you to help me make this right. Evelyn stood, her face a mixture of hurt and anger. This has destroyed me, Victor. And I don't know if I can trust you anymore. But for now, all I can say is that I'll try. She walked away, leaving Victor alone in a silence that was both deafening and revealing. For the first time in years, he faced the true extent of what he had sacrificed and realized he'd have to fight to save what was left of his life. The next morning, Victor gathered the courage to speak to his children. He found Elizabeth and Victor Jr. waiting for him in the living room, their faces full of curiosity and worry. Elizabeth was the first to break the silence. Dad, what's going on? Mom's upset, and you've been acting strange. Victor swallowed, gathering his resolve. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. He hesitated before continuing, feeling his heart pound. I have a son from a relationship before I met your mother. His name is Marcus, and he's your brother. Elizabeth covered her mouth in shock, her eyes filling with tears, while Victor Jr. stared, his face an unreadable mask. So, we have a brother we never knew about? Elizabeth's voice shook as she spoke. Victor nodded, his voice full of remorse. Later that night, Victor Jr. came to his father's study, knocking lightly on the door. Come in, Victor said, surprised but grateful for his son's presence. Victor Jr. entered, closing the door behind him and taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. So, you have another son, he began, with a neutral tone that hid the weight of his emotions. Yes, I do, Victor replied, his voice subdued. And I regret every day that I never acknowledged him. Victor Jr. looked thoughtful, his gaze piercing as he studied his father. You're bringing him into our lives now. Have you thought about what that means for us? For this family? I have. And I know it's a lot to ask. But I want you and your sister to know him, to have the chance to understand what he's been through. Victor Jr. nodded slowly. I'll give him a chance. But it won't be easy, Dad. And it won't be the same between us either, he said quietly before standing up. Victor knew that his son's words carried truth, and as he watched him leave the study, he felt both the weight of the journey ahead and the faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps, just maybe, his family would find a way to heal. Alone once more, Victor stared at the darkened city skyline outside his window. He understood that he could no longer hide from his past, that the road to redemption would be long and painful. But for the first time in years, he felt that he might finally be heading in the right direction. Evelyn sat in silence, her gaze fixed on Victor, her eyes reflecting both expectation and a deep, painful confusion. The Caldwell mansion, usually a place of family gatherings and calm, now seemed to carry a weight of tension so thick it was suffocating. Victor struggled to find the right words, knowing that this conversation would shake the foundation of their marriage, perhaps irreversibly. But he also knew he had no choice. It was time to face the truth. Evelyn, he began slowly, his voice faltering. I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. But I made a terrible mistake, and hiding it for all these years. Well, it's only made things worse. She folded her arms, her face a mixture of impatience and dread. Just say it, Victor, Evelyn replied, her voice strained. This secrecy, it's making things worse. Victor took a breath, feeling the weight of all those years pressing down on him. He closed his eyes, remembering Amara, the letter, and the young man who had confronted him in his office. Evelyn, there's no easy way to say this. I had a relationship before I met you, and that relationship, it led to a child. A son, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Evelyn's face contorted with shock. She stood still, absorbing the revelation. The words seemed to echo in the silence of the room. You have a son? Her voice wavered, a mixture of disbelief and devastation. Yes, Evelyn. A son I never acknowledged, never cared for, because I was too afraid of losing everything. His name is Marcus, and he found me. He came looking for answers, and I realized I can't keep hiding the truth any longer. Evelyn looked away, her hands trembling. She was processing, but he could see the pain etched into every feature. And what did you think, Victor? That you could keep it a secret forever? Pretend he didn't exist and that none of this would ever surface? Her voice was cold, filled with barely contained anger. I convinced myself that hiding it was the best thing for everyone, Victor admitted, his own voice thick with regret. But now I realize it was only the best thing for me. And I know that facing it now will hurt, but I can't run from it anymore. Evelyn took a few steps away from him, her expression raw with hurt. She was struggling, and he knew that his next words would either solidify or destroy what was left of their trust. And what now, Victor? She asked, a tremor in her voice. You plan to bring this son into our lives? After all these years of lies? Victor looked at her, desperation and regret filling his face. Yes, Evelyn. If he allows it, I want to recognize him as my son. He deserves to know he has a father, even if that father has been absent for so long. She laughed bitterly, a sound full of resentment. And what about us? What about our children? Do you really expect us to accept that you hid such a monumental part of your life? To welcome him and just pretend that everything is okay? Victor lowered his head, knowing he was asking for something enormous, something almost impossible. I know this isn't easy, but I'm asking for a chance. A chance to set things right, Evelyn. I want to fix what I've broken, not only with Marcus but with you and our children as well. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Victor, this has shattered a part of me I don't know if I can ever rebuild. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, she said softly, her voice breaking. But maybe, just maybe, we can try. For our family. She turned and left the room, leaving Victor alone in the weighty silence, feeling the magnitude of the destruction he'd wrought. He knew she had given him only the faintest hope, but it was more than he had dared to expect, and he clung to that hope with everything he had. The next morning, Victor knew he had to face his children. Over breakfast, he found Elizabeth and Victor Jr. waiting for him, both looking tense, sensing the strain between their parents but unaware of the real reason. Elizabeth was the first to speak. Dad, what's going on? Mom seems really upset, and you've been so distant. Just tell us what's happening, she pleaded, her voice tinged with worry. Victor took a deep breath, preparing himself for what would likely be the hardest conversation of his life. There's something I need to tell you both, something I should have told you long ago. He looked at them, his heart pounding as he tried to find the right words. Before I met your mother, I had a relationship with someone else. Her name was Amara, and that relationship resulted in a child. A son. His name is Marcus, and he's your half-brother. Elizabeth covered her mouth, her face a mixture of shock and hurt. Victor Jr. remained still, his expression unreadable but his eyes full of questions. You mean, we have a brother we never knew about? Elizabeth's voice trembled, her eyes reflecting the betrayal she felt. Victor nodded, his face etched with regret. Yes. And I realize I've let you down by hiding this. I can't undo what I've done, but I'm hoping you can try to understand, and maybe give me a chance to make things right. Elizabeth shook her head, standing up as tears welled in her eyes. Dad, this changes everything. I don't know how I can look at you the same way, she said, her voice full of pain, before she turned and left the room. Victor Jr. watched her go, then looked back at his father with a gaze that was both piercing and pensive. It's going to take a lot of time, Dad. For all of us, he said quietly, before getting up and following his sister out of the room, leaving Victor alone. As the day went on, Elizabeth's silence weighed heavily on Victor. She had always been the one to look up to him, to believe in his image as the steady, strong patriarch of the family. Her words, her look of disappointment, had cut deeper than he expected. Later that evening, Victor went out to the garden, where he found Elizabeth sitting alone on a stone bench, gazing at the city lights. She didn't turn as he approached, but he could feel her tension. Elizabeth, he said softly, taking a seat beside her. I know this has hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry. She stayed silent for a moment, before finally responding in a voice full of resentment and sorrow. How could you, Dad? How could you keep something like this from us? I thought you were someone I could look up to. Victor sighed, his heart heavy with regret. I don't expect you to understand, and I know I've let you down. I've spent years pretending I could just forget the mistakes of my past. But when Marcus came to find me, it was like the truth I had hidden for so long came crashing down. Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes full of hurt. I looked up to you, Dad. And now, I don't even know who you are, she said, her voice breaking. Then she stood up, brushing a tear away, and left the garden, leaving Victor alone once again. In the days following his revelation to Evelyn and their children, Victor could feel the fragility of his family's trust in him, as though they were all walking on thin ice that could crack at any moment. Every conversation felt cautious, filled with unspoken hurt and resentment. But Victor was determined to make things right, even if he had to piece their lives back together bit by bit. One morning, Victor received a call from Marcus. It was unexpected. They had parted on tense terms, and Victor hadn't anticipated hearing from him so soon. But here he was, inviting Victor to meet at a small cafe near Marcus's apartment. Victor accepted immediately, a mix of hope and anxiety brewing in his chest. When Victor arrived at the cafe, he found Marcus already seated at a corner table, a coffee cup in hand and his expression unreadable. Marcus gestured for him to sit, his posture tense but controlled. Thank you for meeting me, Victor said as he took his seat, attempting to keep his tone calm. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then spoke, his words measured. I thought a lot about what you said, about wanting to make things right. But you have to understand that this isn't something that can just be fixed with a few conversations. Victor nodded, aware of the gravity in Marcus's tone. I know that, Marcus. I'm not expecting you to forgive me instantly, and I know I can't make up for the years you and your mother had to struggle alone. But I want to try, if you'll let me. Marcus looked down at his coffee, as if gathering his thoughts. You know, I grew up wondering about you, he said, his voice softer. Mom never talked about you, at least not in detail. But she always told me to be strong, to build my own path. I know now that she did it because she didn't want me to feel the loss, the absence. She raised me to be everything you weren't. Victor felt his throat tighten at the words. Amara's strength and dedication became even more apparent to him, and he realized how much he had underestimated the sacrifices she'd made. She was an extraordinary woman, Victor admitted quietly. And you've grown into an extraordinary man. More than I deserve to call my son. Marcus's eyes met his, a flicker of something softer in his gaze before he looked away. I don't know what I want yet, Victor. Part of me just wanted to confront you, to make you feel what it was like to be abandoned. But seeing you here, trying, I'm not sure anymore. I think maybe I need time. Time to figure out if I even want you in my life. Victor reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on the table. Take all the time you need, Marcus. I'm not going anywhere this time. A heavy silence fell between them, yet it held an understanding that hadn't been there before. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a start. Marcus slowly nodded, acknowledging Victor's words, and then he stood, gathering his things. I'll be in touch, he said, his voice steady but guarded. But don't push me. Let me come to you when I'm ready. Victor watched him leave the cafe, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. He knew this wasn't forgiveness, but it was a glimmer of hope, a possibility of rebuilding something with the son he had neglected for so long. Back at home, Evelyn noticed the shift in Victor's demeanor that evening. He seemed more grounded, more focused, as if his talk with Marcus had given him a sense of purpose. She watched him for a moment before deciding to bring up a subject that had been lingering in her mind. How did it go with Marcus? She asked, her voice tentative, as they sat together in the quiet of their living room. Victor turned to her, surprised that she was willing to discuss it, and then he nodded. It went better than I expected, honestly. He's willing to give us a chance. A small one, but it's something. Evelyn looked down, her expression a mixture of relief and sadness. I'm glad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But, Victor, I need to know something. What about us? Can we ever get back to what we had? Victor moved closer, gently taking her hands in his voice filled with sincerity. Evelyn, I know that what I've done can never be erased. But I want you to know that I love you and that I am here, fighting to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of insincerity, any shadow of the man who had hidden such a monumental part of his life. But all she saw was remorse and a deep desire to mend the fractures he had caused. Then we'll take this one step at a time, she replied softly, her fingers tightening slightly around his. But know that this trust has to be rebuilt. You may have won back some trust with Marcus, but with us, with me, it will take longer. Victor nodded, understanding the weight of her words, but grateful for her willingness to try. They sat together in silence, a tentative but hopeful silence, each one acknowledging the long journey ahead. The following days were a whirlwind for Victor. He focused on work, attending meetings and managing the company's affairs, but his mind kept drifting to his family. His world had been compartmentalized for so long, neatly divided into sections where one part never touched another. Now, his personal and professional lives were colliding, and he could no longer separate the roles he had once so carefully maintained. One evening, he decided to call a family meeting. He wanted to address the lingering tension, the awkward silences that had filled their home since the truth about Marcus was revealed. Elizabeth and Victor Jr. arrived in the living room with caution in their eyes, while Evelyn sat beside him, her face a calm mask hiding a storm of emotions. I know I've shaken this family to its core, Victor began, looking at each of them. And I can't ask you to forgive me overnight. But I want to work to rebuild the trust I've broken. I want us to find a way to move forward, together, as a family. Elizabeth crossed her arms, her expression still guarded. And how are we supposed to do that, Dad? You've been hiding something so huge, lying to all of us for years. How do you expect us to just get past that? Victor nodded, absorbing her words. I don't expect it to be easy, Elizabeth, but I am here, willing to do whatever it takes. I know this won't be the same as it was before, and maybe that's for the best. But if we take this one day at a time, we can build something new, something honest. Victor Jr., who had remained silent, finally spoke up. Dad, this isn't just about what you did. It's about who you are now. If you really mean what you're saying, Then we need to see it. We need to see that you're willing to be the father we thought you were." Victor felt the weight of his son's words, the silent ultimatum in them. He understood that his actions going forward would speak louder than any promises he could make. "I understand, and I'm ready to show you that I can be that father. I'm not running from this, from any of you, or from Marcus. I'm here for all of you." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm, offering him a quiet look of support. Her presence, her willingness to remain by his side through the storm, gave him the strength he needed. After a moment of silence, Elizabeth finally nodded, though her expression remained serious. "All right, Dad. We'll try. But this has to be different. You have to be different." Victor looked at his family, feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation. He knew he was asking for an enormous amount of patience and trust, but their tentative acceptance was a start, and that was more than he could have hoped for. In the weeks that followed, Victor began to meet with Marcus more frequently. They were small gestures, inviting him to dinners, showing him parts of his life he hadn't shared before. Slowly, the barriers between them started to soften, the resentment replaced by something more fragile but hopeful. One afternoon, Marcus and Victor Jr. crossed paths at the family home, each hesitant but curious. They had seen each other briefly during previous meetings, but this was the first time they would spend time together without their father's mediation. "So, you're my brother," Victor Jr. said, his voice both questioning and accepting. Marcus nodded, a faint smile on his face. "Yeah, looks like it," he replied. The two shared an uncertain laugh, and Victor Jr. extended a hand. "Welcome to the family, I guess," he said. As they shook hands, Victor watched from a distance, his heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. He knew that every step they took, every small gesture of acceptance, was leading them towards something he had once thought impossible, a family rebuilt on trust and honesty. Victor knew he was still walking on a thin line, where any misstep could unravel what he had managed to salvage. But now, for the first time in decades, he felt that he was walking in the right direction. Months passed, and Victor continued his slow, painful journey toward rebuilding his family's trust. Though their relationships were still delicate, each step he took felt like a small victory. He had also managed to maintain a cautious but growing relationship with Marcus. While there was still a guarded tension between them, Victor knew that even the smallest gestures, a shared coffee, a few minutes of sincere conversation, were foundations for something greater. One crisp fall afternoon, Victor decided it was time to formally introduce Marcus to the wider family circle, including relatives and friends who knew him only as the CEO of Caldwell Industries and the perfect family man. He planned a dinner at their home, and as he went over the details with Evelyn, she looked at him with a mix of skepticism and caution. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Victor?" she asked, her expression reflecting the anxiety she was trying to keep at bay. "Not everyone will accept this easily, and it may put even more strain on our family." Victor took her hands, offering a reassuring smile. "I know it won't be easy, Evelyn, but I need to do this. Marcus deserves to be recognized, not hidden away, and I want him to know that he has a place here, with us." Evelyn sighed but gave him a small nod of understanding. "All right, Victor, but let's be prepared. Not everyone will take this news with open arms." The evening of the dinner arrived, and the Caldwell home filled with familiar faces. Extended family, friends, and colleagues mingled in the spacious living room, unaware of the life-altering announcement that was about to unfold. Victor stood near the fireplace, scanning the room until he spotted Marcus standing by himself, his posture tense and uncomfortable among strangers. Victor walked over to him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," Victor said, his voice low but filled with appreciation. "I figured it was about time," Marcus replied, his tone cautious. "But let's be clear, I'm not here for anyone's approval." Victor nodded, respecting Marcus's boundaries. He had come to realize that Marcus's pride and independence were strengths molded by the years of hardship he had endured. "I know. And you don't need anyone's approval. But tonight, I want them to see you for who you are, a part of this family." The murmur of conversations subsided as Victor raised his glass, drawing everyone's attention. He cleared his throat, preparing himself for the truth he was about to lay bare. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I have something important to share, something I've kept hidden for too long. It's time I bring a part of my life into the open that I should never have kept in the shadows." He took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to Evelyn, who gave him a supportive nod, and then to Marcus, who watched him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "This is my son, Marcus Johnson," Victor announced, his voice steady. "For years, he was absent from my life because of choices I made, choices I deeply regret. Tonight, I want to welcome him into our family and honor him as the remarkable man he has become." A ripple of surprise and shock passed through the room. Family members exchanged glances, some taken aback, others visibly uncomfortable. Victor Jr. moved to stand beside his father, a silent gesture of solidarity, while Elizabeth remained seated, her expression reserved but thoughtful. After a brief pause, one of Victor's older relatives, a woman with stern eyes, stepped forward. "Victor, I didn't know," she began, her voice a mix of disbelief and judgment. "This is quite a shock. Do your children know?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, we all know. And we support Victor's decision. Marcus is part of this family now, and we're committed to moving forward together." The room fell into a tense silence, but Victor Jr. broke the tension, raising his glass with a determined smile. "To family. To second chances, no matter how difficult," he toasted, his voice carrying a note of conviction. The others gradually joined in, raising their glasses with hesitant acceptance, though Victor could feel some stares linger on Marcus with skepticism and even disapproval. He knew not everyone would embrace his son immediately, but this was the first step, and Marcus's quiet but dignified presence spoke volumes. After the toast, Marcus and Victor Jr. found themselves alone on the back patio, away from the scrutiny of the other guests. The two brothers stood in silence for a moment, until Victor Jr. spoke. "So, how does it feel, being here, part of all this?" Marcus looked at him, a faint smile breaking his usual guarded expression. "Strange, to be honest. I never thought I'd be in this world. Your world." Victor Jr. nodded, understanding the weight of Marcus's words. "Well, you're here now. And for what it's worth, I'm glad. It's good to have you around." They shared a moment of mutual understanding, and Marcus felt a warmth he hadn't expected. For the first time, he began to see the possibility of belonging. In the following weeks, the tentative acceptance from the extended family grew. Evelyn, while still processing her own pain, made genuine efforts to bridge the gap between Marcus and herself. One afternoon, she invited Marcus to join her for tea, an unusual request that Marcus agreed to with a touch of skepticism. As they sat in the quiet of the sunroom, Evelyn stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Marcus, I want you to know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that's happened. I know we can never undo the past, but I hope we can find a way to understand each other." Marcus watched her, sensing the sincerity in her words. "I appreciate that, Evelyn," he replied, his tone cautious but genuine. "I know this isn't easy for you, or for anyone here." She nodded, smiling slightly. "You're right. But I see now that you're part of this family, and I'd like to get to know you better, if that's all right." Marcus felt a small but significant shift within himself. The walls he had built around his heart began to weaken, and he nodded in agreement. "I'd like that too." Not everything, however, was smooth in their path toward unity. Elizabeth, who had initially stayed distant, was struggling to reconcile the father she idolized with the man who had kept secrets for so long. Her discomfort simmered until one evening, after an awkward family dinner, she couldn't contain it any longer. "I don't get it, Dad," she said, her voice sharp, as they all gathered in the living room. "You spent all these years building this image, making us believe you were perfect. And Now we have to accept that you're not the man we thought you were. Victor sighed, feeling the weight of her words. He knew this moment would come, and he was ready to face it. Elizabeth, I know I let you down, and I can't take back the pain I caused. But I hope you'll see that I'm trying to be honest, to do what's right. Elizabeth crossed her arms, her expression conflicted. But it's so hard, Dad. You raised us to believe in integrity and honesty, and now I don't even know if I can trust you. Victor looked at her, his heart aching with regret. I understand, Elizabeth. All I can do now is show you who I am, who I'm trying to be. And I'll work every day to earn back your trust. Elizabeth looked away, her eyes misty, but after a pause, she gave him a slight nod. All right. I'll try, Dad. But it's going to take time. Victor's heart lifted slightly. He knew it wasn't full acceptance, but it was a step in the right direction. In the months that followed, the Caldwell family continued to navigate their new reality. Victor and Marcus found a rhythm in their meetings, growing closer with each encounter. The brothers, Victor Jr. and Marcus, developed a bond of their own, often spending time together outside of family obligations. During one of these casual evenings, Victor Jr. looked over at Marcus as they played a round of pool in a quiet bar downtown. You know, I never thought I'd have a brother out of nowhere, Victor Jr. said with a chuckle. But honestly, it feels like we've always been family. Marcus smiled, letting down his guard in a way he rarely did. I feel the same. I've spent so many years on my own that it's strange, but good, to have someone to call family. As they clinked their glasses in a silent toast, they realized they had both found something they didn't know they were missing, a sense of brotherhood. Victor felt a profound change within himself as well. He had spent so long running from the truth, crafting a life based on control and appearances, but now he felt liberated, as if a weight had been lifted. He knew he was far from perfect and that his mistakes had deeply affected everyone he loved, but for the first time in his life, he was facing those mistakes head-on. One night, as he sat by the window of his office, looking out at the New York skyline, he reflected on how different his life had become. He was no longer just a powerful CEO, but a man seeking redemption, a father striving to reconnect with his children, a husband working to rebuild trust, and a man learning to love a son he had abandoned. And in those quiet moments, as he stared at the city lights, Victor felt a sense of hope. He knew there would still be challenges, that the road to healing would be long, but he was ready for it. For his family, and for himself, he was willing to keep fighting. Victor Caldwell could hardly believe how far he had come over the past year. Every decision he made now was focused on repairing the relationships he had nearly shattered. But while progress had been made, he was acutely aware that he still had far to go. His life had transformed from one driven by ambition and image to one motivated by the desire to build something real with his family. One evening, Victor called Marcus and asked if he would be willing to meet him at a small cafe near Marcus's apartment. They had been meeting regularly, but this time, Victor felt the need to have a different kind of conversation. When Marcus arrived, his expression was a mix of curiosity and guardedness, as it always was, but he greeted Victor with a small nod. As they settled into their seats, Victor took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. The cafe was quiet, the low hum of conversations around them offering a comforting backdrop to the serious discussion he was about to initiate. Marcus, Victor began, his tone unusually somber, I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but having these conversations with you, it's meant more to me than I can put into words. Marcus looked down, his face softening just a bit. I didn't do it for you, Victor, he replied honestly. I did it because I needed closure. For myself. But I guess I've started to see that maybe there's more to this than just closure. Victor nodded, understanding. I know, and I appreciate that. But I also want you to know that I'm here for you. For whatever you need, not just to fix my mistakes, but to be a real father to you. If you'll let me. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms, studying Victor carefully. What does that mean to you, being a father. Because for most of my life, I had to figure out things on my own. I don't really know what it's like to have a father." The question struck Victor deeply, and he realized how much he had taken for granted with his other children, Elizabeth and Victor Jr. They had always had him there, however imperfectly, while Marcus had been forced to navigate life without any guidance from him. "It means being there, Marcus," Victor said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "It means offering support, listening, and showing up when you need me. I know I can't replace what you lost, but I want to be present in your life now, in whatever way you're comfortable with." Marcus held his gaze, his expression softening. "I appreciate that. But, Victor, I don't know if I'm ready to call you Dad. Maybe one day. But for now, let's just keep working on this, whatever this is." Victor managed a small, grateful smile. "Of course, Marcus. I'm here for whatever you need." They shared a quiet moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. For the first time, Marcus felt the faintest hint of something he had never felt before, a sense of family with Victor. Meanwhile, back at the Caldwell home, the delicate balance of family dynamics was shifting. Evelyn had been quietly watching her husband's efforts to reconnect with Marcus and with their children, and while she was still processing her own hurt, she couldn't deny that Victor was changing. One evening, after Victor had returned home from his meeting with Marcus, Evelyn asked to speak with him in private. They went to the living room, away from their children, and sat across from each other, the weight of everything left unspoken hanging between them. "Victor," Evelyn began, her voice careful, "I see the efforts you're making, and I think I'm ready to try and let go of some of the anger I've been holding on to." Victor's heart leapt with hope, but he kept his tone steady. "I know it's not easy, Evelyn. I can't tell you how sorry I am for everything, for all the pain I caused you and the kids. I wish I could undo it all." She nodded, her expression softening, though her eyes still held traces of pain. "I know you're sorry, Victor, and I believe you're trying. But I need to see that this is lasting, that you're committed to this for the long run. I need to see that you'll be here not just for a few months, but for the rest of our lives." Victor reached out, taking her hands in his voice full of resolve. "I am, Evelyn. I want to rebuild everything I've broken. With you, with our children, with Marcus. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat together in silence, a shared understanding finally beginning to take root. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was the first step toward a new foundation. With time, Victor Jr. and Marcus continued to build a brotherly bond. They shared more dinners, played pool, and sometimes spent long evenings talking about life, work, and the pressures they each faced. Their growing connection was a source of relief and joy for Victor, who watched from a distance as the two men started to develop the kind of bond he had feared would never be possible. One night, Victor Jr. invited Elizabeth to join him and Marcus for a drink at a cozy bar in the city. Elizabeth had been distant from Marcus, still wary of the upheaval his presence had brought to their lives, but at Victor Jr.'s urging, she agreed. When she arrived, Marcus greeted her with a polite but reserved smile. "Elizabeth," he said, nodding. "Hi, Marcus," she replied, her tone formal but not unfriendly. They settled into a booth, and as the evening wore on, the awkwardness slowly faded. Victor Jr. did his best to keep the conversation light, sharing funny stories from his childhood that made both Elizabeth and Marcus laugh. Gradually, Elizabeth felt herself relaxing, seeing Marcus not as an outsider but as someone who had also faced struggles and who had been thrust into a family he barely knew. At one point, Elizabeth turned to Marcus, her expression softer than it had been since they first met. "I just want you to know," she began, her voice gentle, "that this hasn't been easy for any of us. But I see that you're trying, and I appreciate that." Marcus looked at her, surprised but grateful. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I know this has been difficult, and I'm sorry for the disruption I've caused. I never wanted to make things harder for you." She nodded, her lips curving into a slight smile. "Well, it's not all your fault. Our dad, He made a lot of mistakes. But we're all here now, and I suppose we have to figure out how to move forward." The three of them shared a quiet toast, and in that moment, Elizabeth felt a shift within herself, a willingness to at least try to welcome Marcus into her life. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time, she felt that it was possible. As the months passed, Victor's dedication to his family and his newfound relationship with Marcus began to yield results. He was slowly earning back the trust of his children and repairing the wounds he had caused. Yet, despite the progress, he knew there was still one final monumental step he had to take to truly complete this journey. A public acknowledgement of Marcus, a formal, undeniable declaration to the world. He decided to make this declaration at the annual Caldwell Industries Charity Gala, an event attended by the most influential people in New York. The gala had always been a place where Victor showcased his success and power, but this time, he would use it to honor the family he had nearly lost. The night of the gala arrived, and Victor stood by the stage, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. Evelyn, Victor Jr., and Elizabeth stood nearby, and when Marcus arrived, Victor could see the hesitation in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, his voice low, as he looked around the crowded ballroom. Victor nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes. It's time the world knew. You're my son, Marcus, and I want everyone to know it." Marcus took a deep breath, nodding slightly as he joined Victor on stage. As they walked up together, a hush fell over the crowd, whispers spreading like wildfire as guests took in the unfamiliar man standing beside Victor Caldwell. Victor stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. This gala has always been a celebration of success, but tonight, I want it to be a celebration of something more important. Family." He paused, glancing at Marcus, then at Evelyn and their children in the audience. "For many years, I made choices that prioritized ambition over family, and I deeply regret those choices. Tonight, I'd like to introduce you all to my son, Marcus Johnson." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience, but Victor continued, undeterred. "Marcus is a part of my family, a part of my life. And though I cannot undo the mistakes I made, I can stand here tonight and acknowledge him, publicly and proudly, as my son." The audience remained silent for a moment, processing the revelation, and then, slowly, applause began to build, filling the room. Victor turned to Marcus, who looked back at him with a mixture of shock and gratitude. It was a turning point, one that Victor knew would mark the beginning of a new chapter. After the applause subsided, Victor stepped away from the microphone, and Marcus, moved by the gesture, extended his hand. But Victor surprised him, pulling him into an embrace instead, the years of silence and separation falling away as they stood together on that stage. In that moment, Victor felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, he was fully accepting of his past, no longer hiding from his mistakes but facing them openly, with a family that stood by his side. And as he looked out at the faces of his loved ones, he knew he was finally on the path to redemption. The days following the charity gala were a whirlwind. News of Victor's public acknowledgement of Marcus spread quickly, dominating headlines and social media. Caldwell Industries faced mixed reactions. Some applauded Victor's transparency, while others criticized the scandal, predicting it would tarnish his company's pristine reputation. But for the first time in his life, Victor wasn't concerned about public opinion. All that mattered to him was the approval of his family. As expected, the media frenzy put immense pressure on the entire Caldwell family. Evelyn, though shaken, handled the public scrutiny with grace, her quiet strength a testament to her resilience. Victor Jr. and Elizabeth, however, had a more difficult time. They found themselves constantly questioned about their new brother, bombarded with invasive inquiries about their personal lives. One evening, Victor Jr. decided to confront his father. He found Victor in his study, papers spread across his desk, his expression one of deep concentration. "Dad," Victor Jr. began, his voice unusually sharp, "I need to talk to you about all of this. About Marcus, about the media, about what you've put us through." Victor looked up, noticing the frustration and exhaustion etched on his son's face. He set his papers aside, giving his full attention to Victor Jr. "I understand, son. I know this has been difficult, and I want to hear what you have to say." Victor Jr. took a deep breath, clearly struggling to articulate his feelings. It's like our lives have been turned upside down," he said, pacing the room. "First, we find out you had this whole other life, a son we never knew about, and then, suddenly, he's here. And now the entire world knows. People are questioning us, judging us. I don't know how to handle it." Victor watched his son, guilt weighing heavily on him. He stood, placing a hand on Victor Jr.'s shoulder. "You're right, and I can't take away the difficulties I've caused. But I can promise you that I'll be here for you, for our family, through every challenge that comes our way. I know I've asked too much of you, but I'm not going to back down from this, because Marcus deserves to be part of our lives." Victor Jr. looked at his father, his expression softening as he saw the genuine regret in his father's eyes. Slowly, he nodded. "All right, Dad. I'll stand by you. But I need you to know that this has to be real. I'm not willing to support something just for appearances." Victor tightened his grip on his son's shoulder, pride and appreciation in his gaze. "Thank you, son. I mean that." As the initial shock of the public revelation settled, Victor and Marcus began meeting more frequently, finding a sense of normalcy in their relationship. They developed a routine, weekly coffee meetings where they discussed everything from life to work, occasionally touching on personal stories that brought laughter or solemn reflection. During one of these meetings, Marcus shared a memory that caught Victor off guard. "You know," Marcus began, a faint smile on his face, "when I was a kid, I used to imagine what it would be like to have a father. I'd see other kids with their dads at school events or on weekends, and I'd wonder if I'd ever have that." Victor's throat tightened as he listened, his heart aching for the child he had unknowingly left behind. "Marcus, I can't even begin to understand how much pain my absence must have caused you. But if there's anything I can do to make up for it, I want to try." Marcus looked down, taking a slow breath. "Honestly, I think just being here is enough. I spent so much time resenting you, but now I'm starting to see things differently. It's strange, but sometimes I feel like we have more in common than I thought." Victor smiled, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. "I feel the same way, and I'm honored that you're giving me this chance." Their conversations grew deeper over time, and Victor found himself revealing parts of his past he had never shared with anyone. He told Marcus about his early struggles, the sacrifices he made to build Caldwell Industries, and even the moments of doubt and loneliness that came with the price of success. It was during one of these conversations that Marcus asked a question Victor hadn't anticipated. "Do you regret it? Building the company, focusing on success, if it meant losing all of this?" Victor hesitated, thinking carefully before responding. "At one time, I would have said no, that everything I did was worth it. But now I realize I've sacrificed things that no amount of success can replace. If I could go back, I would do it all differently." Marcus nodded, his gaze contemplative. "Maybe that's why you're here now. To make up for it, to build something real. Not just in business, but in life." Victor felt a surge of emotion, his respect for Marcus growing with each word. His son was wise beyond his years, with a sense of integrity that humbled him. "Thank you, Marcus. You're helping me become the man I should have been all along." Meanwhile, Evelyn found herself dealing with the social ramifications of Victor's past. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired her for her poise and social standing now offered whispered words of pity or judgmental glances. One day, while leaving her weekly tennis match at the country club, she overheard two women in the locker room. "Can you believe Evelyn Caldwell? All these years, and she had no idea her husband had another child," one woman whispered. "Makes you wonder what else he might be hiding," the other replied with a snicker. The words cut through Evelyn, and for a moment she felt a surge of anger and shame. But then, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she realized that her life, her family, and her choices were her own. She took a deep breath, gathering her resolve, and walked past the women without a word, holding her head high. Later that evening, Evelyn spoke to Victor about her experience, her tone calm but determined. "Victor, I've decided I'm done with worrying about what others think. This is our family, and I'm going to stand by it." "By you?" Victor looked at her, admiration and gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn. I know this hasn't been easy, but your strength, it means more to me than you'll ever know." Evelyn gave him a small, genuine smile, the bond between them strengthened by shared trials and forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of unity with her husband, a feeling she had feared lost forever. As the family dynamics continued to evolve, Victor Jr. and Marcus grew closer. They discovered shared interests, from classic rock music to hiking, and often spent weekends exploring trails outside the city. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging hike, Victor Jr. stopped to catch his breath, glancing over at Marcus with a smirk. "You know, for a lawyer, you're in pretty good shape," he joked. Marcus laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, I wasn't always just a lawyer. I had to work pretty hard to get here, in more ways than one." Victor Jr. looked at him, a newfound respect in his eyes. "I think we all underestimated you, Marcus." "I know I did." Marcus shrugged, though a faint smile played on his lips. "Honestly, I underestimated you guys too. I never thought I'd find something like this here. With all of you." They continued the hike, their conversation flowing naturally, the silence between them comfortable and easy. For the first time, Marcus felt a true sense of belonging. Back at Caldwell Industries, Victor was confronted by his board of directors. Although he had weathered the initial media storm, there were still voices within the company who questioned his decision to publicly acknowledge Marcus. Harold Whitmore, an influential board member, voiced the concerns openly during a meeting. "Victor, you've done a lot for this company, but this recent revelation, it's put us in a difficult position. Our investors are worried about the scandal's impact on our reputation." Victor took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he addressed the room. "I understand your concerns, Harold, but I stand by my decision. Marcus is my son, and I won't apologize for acknowledging him. If anything, this should show our investors that Caldwell Industries values integrity and family above appearances." The room fell silent, but Victor saw a few nods of agreement around the table. He had always been a respected leader, and his willingness to stand by his family only seemed to strengthen his position. The board ultimately backed down, leaving Victor with a renewed sense of purpose. After the meeting, Marcus, who had attended as an observer, approached his father. "You didn't have to do that, you know. Stand up for me like that." Victor looked at him, his expression sincere. "Yes, I did. Because you're my son, and that's not negotiable." Marcus felt a surge of pride, and for the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of something bigger than himself, a family, a legacy. The changes in their lives continued to reverberate, creating a deeper, more genuine connection within the Caldwell family. They were no longer defined by secrets or pretenses, but by the honesty and commitment they had chosen to embrace. Victor knew he still had much to atone for, but as he looked around at his family, he felt a peace he had never known before. And as they faced each new challenge together, Victor realized that he had found something far more valuable than success. He had found his family. The Caldwell family's journey toward healing had been slow, but with each passing day, the fragile bonds between them grew stronger. The challenges they had faced, the anger, the betrayal, the hurt, had shaped them into something new, something real. Yet, despite the progress they had made, the road ahead was not without further trials. One evening, Victor decided to invite the family over for a small dinner. It was a casual gathering, just him, Evelyn, Marcus, Victor Jr., and Elizabeth. Over the months, they had grown more comfortable together, and he wanted to create an opportunity for them all to share an evening without the pressures of public scrutiny. As they sat around the table, the atmosphere was light and warm, laughter filling the room. But midway through dinner, Elizabeth broke the cheerful mood with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Dad," she began cautiously, putting down her fork. "I think I need to understand why. Why did you hide Marcus from us for so long?" The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Victor. He looked at Elizabeth, her expression a mixture of pain and curiosity. He knew she deserved an answer, one that went beyond his usual apologies. "Elizabeth," he started, his voice heavy with regret, "when I first found out about Marcus, I was terrified. I thought if I acknowledged him, I'd lose everything. My career, my reputation, even our family." He paused, looking down, feeling the weight of his own words. "I convinced myself that what I was doing was right, that I was protecting all of you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I chose what was easiest, not what was right. And for that, I'm truly sorry." Elizabeth's gaze softened, though her voice still held traces of hurt. "I just don't understand how you could live with it, Dad. All these years, pretending he didn't exist." Victor swallowed, feeling the guilt gnaw at him. "I told myself it was the only way. But I was wrong, Elizabeth. I was so wrong." Marcus, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "We can't change what happened," he said quietly, looking between Elizabeth and Victor. "But we can decide what happens from here on out." Victor looked at his son, grateful for his steady voice, his strength in the face of everything Victor had put him through. Elizabeth nodded slowly, as though accepting Marcus's words, though the sadness in her eyes lingered. The conversation shifted, and Victor felt a bittersweet sense of relief. He knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but he was willing to work for it, no matter how long it took. A few weeks later, an unexpected turn of events came from Victor's professional life. Caldwell Industries had secured a major partnership, and a prestigious corporate award nomination followed. The recognition was an honor, yet it also meant that Victor and his family would once again be thrust into the public eye. Knowing how much attention this would bring to his family, Victor felt torn between celebrating his success and protecting the fragile peace he had found with them. As the award ceremony approached, Victor gathered his family to discuss the situation. "I wanted to talk to all of you before making a decision about this award," he said, looking around at them. "Accepting it would mean more media attention, more public scrutiny. I don't want to put any of you through that if it's not what you want." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Victor, we've come this far together. If this award means something to you, then we're here to support you." Victor Jr. nodded in agreement. "Dad, you deserve this. We'll stand by you, no matter what." Marcus's expression was thoughtful, but he gave a small nod. "We'll face whatever comes together. That's what family does, right?" Victor felt a swell of pride and gratitude. They were no longer just individuals connected by blood. They were a family, one that stood united through the turbulence. The night of the award ceremony arrived, and the Caldwell family entered the grand ballroom together. Victor wore his usual tailored suit, but this time he felt a different kind of confidence. He was not only representing his company, he was representing the family that had given him a second chance. As he stood on stage accepting the award, Victor's mind was filled with the faces of his loved ones. He looked out at the audience, his speech prepared, but as he spoke, he found himself departing from the words he had written. "This award means a great deal to me," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But the greatest success I've found isn't in this trophy or in business achievements. It's in my family, the people who have given me the strength to be here tonight." He paused, looking directly at Evelyn, Victor Jr., Elizabeth, and finally Marcus. "I haven't always been the man I should have been," he continued. "But my family has shown me the importance of honesty, resilience, and forgiveness. I dedicate this award to them and to the commitment we've made to each other." The audience's applause filled the room, and Victor stepped down from the stage, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. When he returned to his family's side, Marcus gave him a firm handshake, then pulled him into a quick hug. "That was honest," Marcus said, a faint smile on his lips. "I respect that." Victor felt a wave of gratitude, knowing that his son was proud of him. "Thank you, Marcus. You've taught me more about honesty than you realize." In the following days, the family settled back into their routines, but Victor could sense a newfound ease among them. His children no longer seemed to hold back as much around him, and Evelyn's laughter, once a rare sound, became more frequent. However, the Caldwell family's journey was far from over. The public recognition had brought them closer, but it had also made Victor aware of how delicate these bonds still were. He knew he needed to continue showing his family that his commitment was unwavering. One afternoon, Victor received a call from a charity organization he had worked with in the past. They were launching an initiative for underprivileged children, and they invited him to participate. He decided to involve his family, hoping it would be an opportunity for them to unite around a common purpose. He proposed the idea over dinner. "I was invited to work with a charity on a new project," he explained, his tone hopeful. "They're looking to raise funds for children's education. I thought it might be a good thing for us to do together as a family." Evelyn's eyes brightened. "I think that sounds wonderful, Victor. It's a chance to do something meaningful." Victor Jr. and Elizabeth nodded in agreement, and even Marcus seemed interested. "Count me in," Marcus said with a small smile. "It sounds like something Mom would have supported." Victor felt a wave of emotion, appreciating the significance of Marcus's words. He could feel Amara's influence, her legacy, woven into this moment. It was as if she were there with them, guiding them toward a better future. The charity project became a bonding experience for the Caldwells. They spent weekends volunteering together, working on everything from organizing events to preparing educational resources. The project gave them a common goal, a shared mission that deepened their relationships. During one event, as they were setting up tables and decorations, Elizabeth walked over to Marcus with a hesitant smile. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft, "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're here. It's taken me a while to accept everything, but I'm happy we're doing this together." Marcus looked at her, surprised, but then he nodded, his expression sincere. "Thanks, Elizabeth. That means a lot. I know this hasn't been easy for you, or for any of us." They shared a moment of mutual understanding, the unspoken forgiveness bringing a sense of peace to both of them. Meanwhile, Victor and Evelyn worked side by side, and as they laughed and shared stories with the other volunteers, Victor felt a new level of closeness with his wife. The trust between them, once shattered, was slowly mending, strengthened by the honesty they had fought so hard to rebuild. At the end of the event, as they all gathered for a family photo, Victor felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He looked at each of them, Evelyn, his steadfast partner, Victor Jr. and Elizabeth, his resilient children, and Marcus, the son he had once lost but had found again. They were his family, flawed yet beautiful, and they had come together not out of duty, but out of love. That night, as they returned home, Victor realized something profound. This family, broken and mended, was his true legacy. Far beyond the walls of Caldwell Industries, beyond the accolades and wealth, it was his family that defined him. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would spend the rest of his life honoring that legacy, ensuring that the family he had once nearly lost would always know they came first. For the first time, Victor Caldwell felt a peace he had never known. He had found his purpose, not in power or prestige, but in the love and trust he was determined to nurture. And as he looked at the faces of his family, he knew that they were finally, truly, united. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet moments of healing and joy for the Caldwell family. Their lives had transformed from a landscape of secrets and betrayals into one of transparency and, above all, trust. Victor felt as if he were finally emerging from a long, dark tunnel, And now, for the first time, he could see the light. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, a tradition they had revived with renewed commitment, Victor looked at each of his family members with gratitude and pride. He had come to realize that the bonds between them had been strengthened not in spite of their challenges, but because of them. "I'd like to make a toast," Victor said, lifting his glass. His voice was strong, filled with emotion. The others raised their glasses, their faces expectant. "To family," he began, looking first at Evelyn, then at each of his children. "To second chances, to forgiveness, and to building a future together. I don't deserve any of you, but I'm grateful every day that you've allowed me to earn my place in this family." Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears as she clinked her glass against his. "And to never taking each other for granted," she added softly. "Thank you, Victor, for fighting to keep us together." The others joined in, each adding their own words of encouragement and love. They laughed, toasted, and for a moment, all the heartache they had endured seemed far away, replaced by a deep sense of unity. As time went on, the family became deeply involved with the charity project they had started together, dedicating themselves to providing education and support for underprivileged children. The Caldwell name, once tarnished by scandal, was now becoming a beacon of hope and generosity, and Victor felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in all his years of corporate success. During one of the charity events, a young boy approached Marcus, his wide eyes filled with admiration. "Are you really Mr. Caldwell's son?" the boy asked, glancing over at Victor, who was helping set up a table nearby. Marcus crouched down, smiling at the boy. "Yes, I am," he replied warmly. "We may not have always been together, but now we're family. That's the most important part." The boy nodded, his gaze turning thoughtful as he watched Marcus. It was moments like these that reminded Marcus how far he and his father had come. The trust they had built felt strong and unbreakable, a testament to both of their resilience and willingness to forgive. Victor watched his son from a distance, pride swelling in his chest. Marcus had become a remarkable man, full of kindness and wisdom, and he knew that Amara's spirit lived on in him. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given, and he promised himself that he would never take it for granted. One afternoon, Victor found Evelyn in their garden, tending to the flowers she had planted over the years. He walked over to her, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun and the peace that had settled into their lives. "You know," he began, his voice gentle, "I never thought I'd feel this happy again." Evelyn looked up, a soft smile lighting her face. "Neither did I," she admitted. "But I think we've found something even stronger than before. We've rebuilt our lives from the ground up, and now it feels real." Victor took her hand, squeezing it as they looked out over the garden, the beauty of the flowers a reflection of the life they had cultivated together. In that moment, Victor realized how fortunate he was to have Evelyn by his side, a partner who had stood by him despite the heartbreak, who had chosen to forgive rather than walk away. "Thank you, Evelyn, for everything. I don't know where I'd be without you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn placed a hand on his cheek, her gaze steady and full of love. "You're here now, Victor, and that's all that matters." A few months later, as the holidays approached, Victor decided to invite both immediate and extended family members for a large holiday gathering. The house was filled with warmth and laughter, the rooms decorated with garlands and lights, and the smell of freshly baked treats wafted through the air. For Victor, this was more than just a celebration. It was a chance to show everyone the family he had fought so hard to rebuild. As they gathered in the living room, Victor took a moment to step back, observing the scene. Evelyn was laughing with a group of relatives, Elizabeth was helping her little cousins unwrap gifts, and Victor Jr. was showing Marcus a family heirloom, explaining its history with a grin. For the first time, Victor felt that everything he had lost had been restored, perhaps even made better. When the evening grew quieter, Marcus approached Victor, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, I never thought I'd be part of something like this," Marcus said quietly, looking around the room. Victor placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice full of warmth. Neither did I. But I'm grateful we're here together. Marcus nodded, his gaze softening. Thank you, Victor. For everything. Victor felt his heart swell. For Marcus to finally express gratitude after everything they had been through meant more than words could convey. No, thank you, Marcus, Victor replied. You've taught me more about love, resilience, and forgiveness than I ever thought possible. They shared a quiet, heartfelt embrace, the bond between them no longer fragile, but firm and true. As the night drew to a close, the family gathered one last time around the fire. Victor looked around at the faces of his loved ones, each one a reminder of the mistakes he had made, but also of the forgiveness and love that had brought them back together. This year has taught me many things, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. But the most important lesson is that family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness, resilience, and love. I'm so grateful to each of you for giving me a chance to be the father and husband I should have been all along. Evelyn reached for his hand, her gaze filled with warmth. And we're grateful that you never stopped fighting for us, Victor. As they sat together, the fire crackling and the soft glow filling the room, Victor felt a peace that was deeper than he had ever known. The journey had been long, and the pain had been real, but they had come through it together, stronger and more united than ever. For the first time in his life, Victor felt he had truly succeeded, not as a CEO, but as a husband, a father, and a man who had finally understood the true meaning of family. And as he looked around at the faces of those he loved, he knew with unwavering certainty that this was his greatest achievement, the legacy he would carry forward with pride and honor. As the last embers of the fire glowed softly, the Caldwell family sat together, wrapped in the warmth of their shared love and forgiveness. They had faced their past, rebuilt their trust, and discovered that, in the end, family was the most important gift of all.